I'm Melina Weiskup in for Steve Lance. The damage from the Los Angeles wildfires is now estimated at around $50 billion. That's 2.5 times the Maui fires. As of now, over 170,000 residents have had to evacuate. NTD's Christina Corona is live at one of those fire sites.
We're here in the city of Altadena, where the Eaton fire has now scorched 10,600 acres, and unfortunately 5 civilians have passed away due to the fire. Right now the winds have calmed down. However, there's lots of ash coming from the northern mountain. We're here on Loma Alta Drive, where several homes are just burned to the ground. As you can see behind me, nothing is left. The only things left standing in many of the homes are the chimneys. Rubble, debris, and charred cars are all that remain of several homes in Altadena. One lifelong resident shared her heartbreak after losing the home she grew up in.
My whole life has been in and out of Altadena and Pasadena. I was planning to finish my life here in Altadena. So the community that once was is no longer what I recognize anymore. So it's definitely a process that it hasn't hit yet, but it's slowly coming to realization that we don't have what we once had.
The community is coming together, with many helping others salvage what they can from the homes. One resident surveying the damage to their friends' and families' homes described the scene as devastating.
Nothing looks the same anymore. Everything's gone. A lot of the places are gone. The car wash where I used to wash my car is completely into shreds. We went over to help them, but it was a little bit too late when she got there. A lot of the fires were really heavy with the winds overnight, and by the time you got there, all you could do was just console them.
The Pasadena Convention Center opened its doors to any residents affected by the fire, and today the Pomona Fairplex opened as an evacuation center for any residents as well as pets and large animals. We're in an area where several homes have stables. We know horses were here. It is just so unfortunate. This is one of 5 fires currently burning in Southern California. As of right now, they're at 0% containment, and it is still under investigation. Reporting from the city of Altadena, Christina Corona, NTD News.
And President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris attended a briefing on the wildfires. We'll let you hear what Biden said about those fires and the federal response.
Today I'm announcing that the federal government will cover 100% of the cost for 180 days. This is going to pay for things like debris and hazard material removal, temporary shelters, first responders' salaries, and all necessary measures to protect life and property.
The president said the federal government is authorizing resources to help suppress the wildfires, including 400 additional firefighters, over 30 firefighting helicopters and planes, 8 Department of Defense C-130s, and 500 wildfire ground clearing personnel. Biden also said that some fire hydrants in Los Angeles County are dry due to a power outage, and that officials are responding to the issue. And late last night on Truth Social, Trump blamed California Governor Gavin Newsom for the fires and called for the governor's resignation. In response to an earlier post from Trump, Newsom's office said the governor is focused on protecting people, not playing politics, and making sure firefighters have all the resources that they need. So what caused those wildfires in Los Angeles, and how did the city's hydrants run out of water? Joining me now is Steve Malloy. He's a senior fellow at the Energy and Environment Legal Institute. He also was Trump's former EPA transition team member. And joining us is Steve. Steve, I want to ask you, the Los Angeles fires have claimed 5 lives as of now, burning since Tuesday. What's caused such uncontrollable fires to start in the first place, and why do you think they started now during California's winter season of all times?
Well, it's all very tragic, and just really a lot of bad luck. A lot of unfortunate factors coincided. We've had a couple years of very wet year, which has given rise to a lot of brush growth in the Santa Monica Mountains. Then the last 6 months, it's the dry season, but it's been drier than average, so that has set the conditions for fire. And then of course we had the Santa Ana winds come through. All they needed was a spark, and then you just have this blowtorch of a fire which started and which has just devastated parts of Los Angeles.
What do you think are some of the most critical factors that those firefighters need to be looking at in the situation that they're working with? And then also talk to me a little bit about the resources that the city and state have to battle the fires.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to say whether this could have been avoided through brush clearing. Maybe it could have. It's hard to say. I think that, and of course, fighting the fire, running out of water in the fire hydrants is just unexcusable. They were not prepared for this sort of worst case scenario, which is what you actually have to prepare for. These people are living in the Palisades, for example, imagining that, well, we'll have a fire hydrant here. If something bad happens, the fire squad's gonna be able to come and put it out. But of course, that was not the case because there's just not enough water and they ran out of pressure, and so the whole area was just devastated. I think that the government owns a lot of this. This is strangely reminiscent of the August 2023 Maui wildfires. You have, brush buildup, unusual winds come through. The government knows about it in advance, but is not prepared. And when the disaster happens, there's no water in the wildfire. So I think the government owns this.
You're saying that the government is responsible for it. We know that all 3 of the 1 million gallon water tanks supply that were there were actually depleted by 3 o'clock in the morning on Wednesday. How do you think the government even allowed this to happen? Why wasn't there a backup?
Well, the government, they didn't foresee this. They just, for whatever reason, they could not foresee this. This was just so huge. Even after the Maui wildfires, they could not imagine that the Santa Anas, would do something similar, if not, worse, in some ways than the Maui wildfires. California has for a long time been distracted by things like climate change, which played no role in this. And they spent all their money building solar panels and wind turbines and EV charging stations. But the actual firefighting apparatus, which you need in case of emergency, is just not up to par, and this is what happens. I'm sure that federal taxpayers will be on the hook for the damage in California, and if we're going to be paying for this, then we ought to have a lot to say into how the water in California gets used. And I know President Trump wants Gavin Newsom to stop the diversion of water for the Delta smelt and send it down south. Gavin Newsom's also supposed to build a bunch of reservoirs. Voters passed a referendum in 2014 allocating money. None of these reservoirs have been built. Obviously, the fire hydrant system was inadequate, not prepared for this large disaster. They should be able to withdraw water from the ocean to fight fires. I mean, salt water, is not ideal, but it's better than just having this entire area torched. So there's a lot that could be done. The government dropped the ball all the way across the board on this. It's just a disaster. It owns it and should be held accountable.
Why would Gavin Newsom not want to keep that water? Why is he dumping it into the ocean? And why would he not want to work with Trump on this effort, as well as why hasn't he built those reservoirs that the voters voted for?
Well, water should not be a political issue, but it is. In fact, it's more than an issue, it's a weapon. Environmentalists created this excuse of this tiny 2-inch fish, the Delta smelt. It's endangered, must be saved, and to hell with everybody else. And so all that water gets wasted. So it's a weapon. Water is the most abundant substance on the planet. And if you can't get it, and you can't even buy it, it's probably because there's an environmentalist standing in the way.
Trump indicated that the government will help rebuild parts of Los Angeles, given the extent of that destruction at this point. What do you think those recovery efforts will look like, Steve?
It's just going to be really expensive for everyone. I mean, I heard estimates of, upwards of $50 billion. And, the federal taxpayer cannot afford to subsidize people living in these beautiful places. The Pacific Palisades, very beautiful. Coast of Florida, very beautiful. Mountains of North Carolina, very beautiful. But, if all these risky places are insured by the taxpayer, wow, we can't afford that. So, people are I think private insurance is going to be the answer for these people, and they should be charged appropriate insurance rates, because we are $36 trillion in debt. We pay $1 trillion in interest every year. We cannot afford to subsidize everyone's homes.
Thank you so much for those great points. Steve Malloy, Senior Fellow at the Energy and Environment Legal Institute, thank you so much for your time.
Emily, thank you.
President-elect Trump set to roll out close to 100 executive orders when he returns to the office in about 10 days. A Democratic senator says he's meeting with Trump to help Washington deliver for constituents. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao has more.
President-elect Trump planning to act on issues like energy and immigration with nearly 100 executive orders for when he returns to the White House. That's according to Senator Mark Wayne Mullen, who was at Trump's meeting with GOP senators on Wednesday night.
As you know, he has almost 100 executive orders that that'll go a long ways to securing the border again and also put the energy sector back in play. But as he said, it's not permanent. I would like reconciliation so we can start making this stuff into legislation.
Trump is also urging Senate Republicans to stick together to confirm his cabinet picks. Meanwhile, Republicans are debating over how exactly to enact Trump's early legislative agenda, including passing a sweeping package on energy, immigration, and border security. While Trump says it doesn't matter to him how exactly Republicans do it, some Senate Democrats say they might push back.
If Donald Trump and Republicans use their new majorities to push the same old GOP policies of tax cuts for the very rich, cuts to health care, trickle-down economics, Democrats will fight back.
But one Democratic senator is signaling willingness to talk and work with Trump. Senator John Fetterman of Pennsylvania says he's accepted an invitation to meet with Trump at Mar-a-Lago, saying he will have a conversation with anyone if he helps him deliver for Pennsylvania and the nation. It comes as Fetterman has been meeting with and voicing support for some of Trump's cabinet picks, including Sean Duffy for Transportation Secretary and Congresswoman Elise Stefanik for UN Ambassador. It comes as some confirmation hearings are coming up for key Trump picks next week. And Pam Bondi, Trump's pick for Attorney General, is also meeting with the Senate Judiciary Committee a week from now. Reporting from West Palm Beach, Iris Tao, NTD News.
Title IX discrimination protections in schools will not be expanded. A federal judge in Kentucky today struck down the Biden administration's efforts to apply it to gender identity or sexual orientation. The court says the Education Department overstepped its power by sidestepping Congress to make the rules. The center of the conversation here is Title IX. That's a 1972 law that's designed to prevent sex-based discrimination in schools. The Biden administration sought to amend Title IX to include LGBT students and broaden the definition of sexual harassment. The changes were originally set to take effect last August, but more than a dozen Republican-led states took the measure to court and were granted a preliminary injunction. Their primary concern was biological boys in girls' bathrooms and sports. Federal courts had already blocked Title IX expansions in 26 states. And with the 119th Congress kicking off, Senate Democrats say they want to lower costs and fight for the working class. The Senate has also today voted to proceed with debating the Laken-Riley Act. NTD correspondent Jason Blair has more.
Sleet, nor snow, nor freezing cold will stop the Democrats from helping working families.
From the cold and windy steps outside the Capitol building, Senate Democrats outlined their priorities and concerns for the new Congress.
Because we know that when working people thrive, we all thrive. That means you have a home that you can afford to live in. That means you have access to quality health care. That means you have the ability to both pay for your prescription drugs and for your groceries.
They say, quote, "We are not here because of who we are against. We are here because of who we are for."
Lower costs for working people and fight every single day for American families in every corner of this country. Democrats stand united.
Senate Democrats say they are willing to work with Republicans, but there are some things they won't compromise on.
Leadership is about picking between the things you have to compromise on and the things you should never compromise on. So wherever I can, I'm going to work across the aisle. But when it comes to our democracy, our rights, our values, I am going to stand up and stand in the breach. So
if the Republicans go after Social Security and Medicare, as many of them say they want to do, they're going to have to go through us.
Also on Thursday, the Senate voted to proceed with debating the Laken-Riley Act.
On this vote, the yeas are 84 and the nays are 9. 3/5 of the senators duly chosen and sworn having voted in the affirmative, the motion is agreed to.
The act would require the Department of Homeland Security to detain an illegal immigrant that has been arrested for theft. It passed the House on January 7th. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
4 former presidents joined President Biden at the Washington National Cathedral for former President Jimmy Carter's state funeral. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has the details.
Early Thursday morning, after lying in state at the Capitol Rotunda for 3 days, the last remains of former President Jimmy Carter were transferred to the Washington National Cathedral for his state funeral after a brief ceremony. All former living presidents joined President Biden at the service in honor of Jimmy Carter. A highlight of the ceremony was the congeniality in between former presidents, regardless of partisan affiliation. Former President Gerald Ford's son and Jimmy Carter's grandson, Jason, and also President Joe Biden delivered eulogies centered on the humility of former President Jimmy Carter and his faith.
While Jimmy is probably the only former president to conduct a weekly Bible class, I know for certain he is the only former president to perform a duet of On the Road Again with Willie Nelson.
Eventually, he did get a cell phone, and one time he called me sort of early on in that process. And on my phone, it said, "Papa, mobile." So I answered it, of course. I said, "Hey, Papa." He said, "Who's this?" I said, "This is Jason." He said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm not doing anything. You called me." He said, "I didn't call you. I'm taking a picture."
Jimmy Carter did justly, loved mercy, walked humbly. May God bless a great American, a dear friend, and a good man.
After his state funeral, the last remains of former President Jimmy Carter were flown from Joint Base Andrews to Lawson Airfield in Fort Moore, Georgia, where after a short ceremony, they were transferred in a motorcade to Plains, Georgia at Maranatha Baptist Church for a final private ceremony with friends and family of the Carter family. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.